Our view is that analytics dashboards are great, but if you're an operator and frontline, you don't have much time right now. How can we, as the technology company, understand where you want to focus and where your leadership wants to focus, and then actually customize all the data we're seeing to proactive insights that are quite actionable?
Sure.
Right? And so that's our view, is like, if you can do those insights, you can do it through the product itself that people already use. It makes it much easier to execute.
Welcome to Season 7 of Bridge the Gap, a podcast dedicated to informing, educating, and influencing the future of housing and services for seniors. Powered by sponsors AccuShield, Align, Nick Map Vision, ProCare HR, Sage, Hamilton Captel, ServiceMaster, Patriot Angels, The Bridge Group Construction, and Solinity, and produced by Solinity Marketing.
Welcome to Bridge the Gap Podcast, the senior living podcast with Josh and Lucas here in Miami. A beautiful day. Winter in Miami is very comfortable as opposed to some of the other places that we're all from. We'd like to welcome a special guest today, Raj from Sage. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here in Miami from 7 degrees in New York.
Yes. Well, normally I kind of live more southern central in the Dallas area. It's been freezing cold there. Knoxville just got some huge snow. And of course, New York is very cold. So what do we got? 80 degrees here in Miami today. It's a beautiful day and we're having amazing conversations. And so Raj, very interesting to get to know you and understand you. We know Lindsay at your company, a great advocate, long timer in the industry. How did all of this get started with you developing Sage?
My background's been mostly in tech startups. So I ended up, for the last 15 years, built a few different companies. Prior to Sage, I was part of the founding team of what is now the largest healthcare payments company serving hospitals. Before that, I started out in the data science side. So worked with a company called Palantir, which is now one of the largest data science companies, to help start their healthcare practice. And there we worked with large hospitals, payers, early on to help them analyze data, to improve care outcomes, operations. And doing that made me kind of committed to healthcare as an entity, because I felt that it was so valuable to use technology to actually makes the lives of operators as well as folks influencing outcomes for care. That was what I wanted to commit my rest of my career to, and use data and technology to help. In terms of senior living specifically, it was personal, right? So in 2019, my grandmother, she passed away from a fall. She fell, she was on the ground for about 6 hours. What I reflected on after her passing was the fact that the technology and infrastructure that I was building for hospitals and payers, like there could be technology applications for senior living and aging. And it felt like it was a segment that was being kind of ignored. In my grandmother's facilities, they were still using walkie-talkies and pagers. They were using, all sorts of systems that were predated. They weren't being able to use data because they weren't generating data. Yeah, like that's why I got really passionate about using my background and our founding team's background to help address some of these challenges.
Well, Raj, I couldn't be more excited to have a mind like yours and the why behind you've joined us in the senior living industry, because, I've often described senior living, which is now such a broad term. As you know, when people say I'm in senior living, like you got to tell me more. But we're kind of this mesh between hospitality meets healthcare. To have folks like yourself and technology partners that have been in the healthcare space to help deliver that to us is really exciting for us, and to be able to share those stories. So talk to us a little bit more about the specific challenges that you see in the senior living industry and how you hope to be able to develop some systems to help to tackle those problems.
Yeah, so I was speaking to an owner yesterday here, and he was talking about what you're talking about, is that historically it's been a real estate business, right? And that's great because real estate businesses, have really good returns. But the healthcare aspect of managing people's care, as well as labor management, has been really challenging for most operators. And I think part of the reason is that in this industry, there aren't great technology frameworks. They're standardized to help them both manage resident care and staffing, right? And so I think the two challenges I see right now is, and right now the industry is seeing a lot of, press in places like the New York Times, Washington Post, is like, how do you make sure resident care is what you would want if you're a family member in these communities? And how do you make it sustainable? Because the folks, as we know, in these communities are working really hard and doing their level best. So how do you use technology to leverage your current resources to make sure that everyone in the community has the best response time when the incidents happen, have the best care being given to them. On the flip side, how do we enable caregivers to A, feel like they have an easier time doing their workflows, and B, get recognition for the work they do? And I think that recognition is so important. If you're there spending 40 hours a week doing things like toileting and mobility and all these things for the residents, but no one's appreciating you, that's hard.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you talked about that. I'm also, while the situation that you experienced with your family member sounds like a pivotal point that kind of puts you over the edge of focusing on like, this is not a good situation, but how do I create a solution that can help with this? We're here at ASHA. ASHA's been working hard as a partner to help to shape public policy. And it seems like the stories that we too often hear about senior living are those that are similar to the experience you had. And that's what the microscope has been on, as opposed to the flip side of what you just said, the recognition for the amazing care that is more often, that's the majority of the stories. Do you think with some of the tools that you're developing that will address some of those challenges that hopefully prevent some of those situations that could become bad stories, do you think that's also going to help us tell a better story publicly? And I mean, like, where do you see your role in that and how you can be part of that?
So I think a lot of times today it's subjective. Hard to prove what was done, even if it was done correctly. I think the data is what we find is the thing that cuts through a lot of the noise. And if you're able to prove that, hey, actually 90% of the time everything's going as we expected, then it makes people feel comfortable. And I think before we start with large public agencies and government regulatory agencies, stuff like that, start with family. There's going to be the 10% where things are probably not going the way we expected. But now there's visibility, so it's not subjective to the care staff or folks that you're having these conversations with. It's very clear to what needs to improve.
Even if perception isn't truly the majority of what happens in the industry and the communities, perception is that uneducated consumer's reality. And so we have to overcome that. So one of our goals has always been here to help to share the love stories, as I call it. And so, I'm really excited to see what you guys do at Sage, what you are doing, and be able to tell our audience and hopefully help create some more positive narratives.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this seems to be, a major issue. Developing a product that gives that data and that access and that insight into care staff and their families is a really great thing.
Yeah, and when I'd say the trip and fall is like maybe 1% of incidents, toileting, mobility, bathing, all these ADLs that need to be managed, and also folks need to understand that these are hours. They're being worked by the caregivers. They're pretty demanding.
Well, and that's something even, our industry has been strained over the last several years with labor, managing labor, understanding what the cost of the labor truly is. And it can be also, daunting depending on the size of your operation. If you don't have a lot of team that has a lot of data and, if they don't have the time to interpret that data and then turn it into useful strategy, it can become a really difficult situation for operators that even have the best intentions. My understanding is that your tool kind of helps that. It kind of takes the guesswork out of all of that calculation and the monitoring and all that. Is that correct?
Our view is that analytics dashboards are great, but if you're an operator in frontline, you don't have much time right now. How can we, as the technology company, understand where you want to focus and where your leadership wants to focus, and then actually customize all the data we're seeing to proactive insights that are quite actionable?
Sure.
Right? And so that's our view, is like if you can do those insights, you can do it through the product itself that people already use, it makes it much easier to execute.
Talk to me a little bit about benchmarking, which is how I'd refer to it. You may have a more accurate term, but for your smaller operators oftentimes, or your regional operators, to have some level of benchmarking, a measure of how I'm stacking up against community to community within my portfolio, but also as an industry. Do you foresee that Sage can be a part of helping to benchmark the industry around these data points?
So I'm getting this request a lot from our existing client base and prospective client base. As recent as like Friday, we had 3 existing and prospective clients ask us about this on different calls. And what I'm finding is that we can play a role here, but what this is going to require is everyone opting in to data sharing in a de-identified way, right? So like we're not going to share who the operator is, but I do think in our dashboards, one of the things we could do is do a reference point.
Sure.
Things like response time or turnovers in specific markets or care revenue, things that we help with. Those are things that we could definitely share around what are the best communities doing?
Sure.
What are the lower percentile communities doing?
Do you think that is even something, because as you've identified, as I've identified, we talk about it, we need to be benchmarking. How important is that for us as an industry? Do you feel strongly about that is something that we should be focusing on, is benchmarking against ourselves and our competitors? Or is that something that, hey, we're kind of missing the boat there, you really need to be focusing on this?
Well, so I think it's two steps. One is benchmarking helps you understand, and just portfolio benchmarking across your portfolio helps you understand where the outliers are, right? Your top performing buildings and maybe your buildings who are struggling. And so it's a starting point because now you have a filtration of like, hey, where do I need to focus? And then beneath that, you have to start figuring out, okay, what are actually the reasons? And that's where you have to start getting deeper into the information and data around, okay, are my shifts not staffed correct? Are there a lot of underperformers in certain shifts? Like, what is the underlying criteria?
Sure.
I think benchmarking helps you understand where to focus.
So some root cause analysis, would that be fair? So do you think the system, what you have now or where it's going, is going to assist operators in the root cause analysis? Or is that more of a, we're going to help you benchmark and then you dive in with your operational teams? How do you see your role in fitting in that?
We intend to be the guiding light. So we're helping you understand holistically how every building's performing if you're managing a large portfolio. And then as you start seeing some of your underperformers, and you can rate them, right? You can figure out different criteria. So we have segments in our portfolio dashboards around which ones are the most liability, right? And so as you start looking into that, it's very clear in the data areas are struggling, and people who are struggling in those communities, if they're giving way too much care, but the revenue's not offsetting it, which makes the buildings struggle, you can see that, right? And then you have to work with the management around the levers. But it's not so much that, hey, you just get the fact that this building is underperforming, but you don't know why.
Sure. Well, Lucas, as I'm hearing Raj talk about this, I know not only is all of our listeners that are actual operators, executive directors, clinical teams, ears perking up, but, you know, the asset managers, the ownership groups, the real estate managers that are doing their best to help the operators identify risk in the portfolio and to be able to implement some strategy to curve that. There's a lot of people that already are and are going to be excited as they listen to this podcast for sure.
Diving more deeper into this information, I know that our listeners are going to want to connect and possibly get a demo. I know that I would love to see more myself. And for that information, we're going to put that in our show notes. Our listeners can go to btgvoice.com, connect with this content, and so much more. And Raj, thank you so much for spending time today and giving these insights.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thanks for listening to another great episode of Bridge the Gap.
Thanks for listening to Bridge the Gap podcast with Josh and Lucas. Connect with the BTG Network team and use your voice to influence the industry by connecting with us at btgvoice.com.